When the music stops grief in the public eye, have you ever noticed how we treat celebrities like they're somehow immune to the most human experiences, as if fame creates a force field against heartbreak, loss, and grief, as if the spotlight somehow sterilizes pain? I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing Sherkita Long-Platt, whose powerful story fundamentally transformed my understanding of the intersection between public life and private pain. Her journey through loss and the unforgiving glare of the spotlight offers us profound lessons about grief, boundaries, and what it truly means to honor someone's legacy. Sharkita isn't just navigating her own healing journey, she's inadvertently creating a masterclass in dignity for anyone watching closely enough to learn. When Sharkita lost her husband, Anthony Platt, better known to the world as DJ Unk, the Atlanta rapper who gave us anthems like Walk It Out and Two Step, she didn't just lose a partner. She lost him while the world watched, commented, and sometimes intruded on what should have been the most private moments of processing her grief. At just 43 years old, DJ Unk's passing sent ripples through the music industry. But while fans mourned an artist, Shakita mourned her husband. There's a vast difference between those two experiences that we rarely acknowledge. The world lost an artist, Shakita shared during our conversation, her voice steady but weighted with truth. I lost my future. That distinction between public icon and private person lies at the heart of what I want to explore today. It's the difference between grieving a legacy and grieving Sunday morning coffee, inside jokes, and the weight of someone on the other side of the bed. Behind every headline announcing a celebrity death, there's a family experiencing the rawest form of grief imaginable, often without the luxury of privacy that most of us take for granted. Their pain becomes content. Their tears become clickbait. Their process becomes public property. And I can't help but wonder, what responsibility do we have to those left behind when the music stops? When the applause fades? When the tributes end and they're left in the deafening silence of absence? The truth is, we've created a culture where fame somehow translates to public ownership. We feel entitled to details, entitled to express our grief alongside family members, entitled to speculate about circumstances. But at what cost to those actually living through the loss? When DJ Young passed, Sharkita made a simple yet profound request on social media: privacy, space, respect for boundaries during an impossible time. That request itself became news, which tells you everything about the world we've created. A world where even asking for the dignity of private grief becomes a headline. People I'd never met were messaging me, calling me, showing up places, she explained, the exhaustion still evident in her voice months later. Some meant well, but intention doesn't erase impact. I needed room to breathe, to process, to figure out who I was without him. Instead, I was managing other people's emotions about my husband. This isn't unique to Sharkita's experience. When we look at other families who've navigated similar waters, patterns emerge that should give us all pause. Consider Valletta Wallace, mother of Christopher Wallace, the notorious Big. After losing her son at just 24 years old, she faced not only the devastation of bearing her child, but also relentless media speculation about his murder, exploitation of his image, and the weight of preserving his legacy while processing her own grief. What did she do? She channeled that pain into purpose, establishing foundations supporting youth empowerment, participating in documentaries that honored her son's contributions rather than sensationalizing his death, and maintaining firm boundaries around how his story would be told. But make no mistake, that transformation from raw grief to purposeful action wasn't immediate. It took years, years during which she deserved protection, not pressure. Or consider the family of Patrick Houston Jr., son of Memphis rapper Project Pat, and nephew to Juicy J, who was tragically killed at 21 during a shooting incident. Their response to sudden bereavement was complicated by immediate media exposure due to Project Pat's prominence in Southern rap. They made limited statements, requested privacy, and focused inward on healing, supported by a community that respected those boundaries rather than demanding access to their pain. These stories share a common thread: the collision between public interest and private pain, between a world hungry for details and families desperate for space, between the icon everyone thinks they knew and the person only a few truly did. What Sherkita taught me through our conversation was that grief itself is transformed when experienced in the public eye. It becomes a performance as much as a process, a balancing act between honoring your own needs and managing external expectations. There were days, she confided, when I couldn't get out of bed, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with interview requests, with fans wanting statements, with people who thought they deserved access to my pain because they loved his music. Let that sink in for a moment. We've normalized the idea that loving someone's art entitles us to details about their death. That being a fan grants us access to their family's most vulnerable moments, that our curiosity trumps their need for privacy. And it's not just celebrities. This happens in our own communities too. When tragedy strikes, how often do we reach out not to offer support, but to gather information? How often do we share details that aren't ours to share? How often do we center ourselves in someone else's story? The truth is, grief is already disorienting enough without an audience. It already dismantles your sense of self without commentary. It already rewrites your future without suggestions from the sidelines. So, what can we learn from Sharkita's experience? What wisdom can we extract from her journey through public loss? First, boundaries aren't just healthy, they're essential. When Sharkita requested privacy, she wasn't being difficult or ungrateful. She was protecting her capacity to heal. She was creating space for authentic grief rather than performed mourning. Setting boundaries felt selfish at first, she admitted, but then I realized if I don't protect my peace now, I won't survive this. And Anthony would have wanted me to survive this. That's a powerful reframe. Boundaries aren't walls that keep others out. They're foundations that keep you standing when everything else has crumbled. Second, legacy preservation requires intentionality. For families of public figures, there's immense pressure to immediately become the keepers of legacy, to have perfect answers about how their loved one should be remembered, to make decisions about unreleased work, about foundations, about memorials, all while in the fog of fresh grief. Shakita described feeling crushed under the weight of getting it right in those early days. Everyone had opinions about how to honor him, but I needed time to figure out what honoring him meant to me first. That patience, that refusal to rush legacy decisions, protected both her healing process and the integrity of how DJ Unk would be remembered. Not as a commodity to be exploited, but as an artist whose work would continue speaking for itself. Third, community support looks different than we might assume. When we hear about someone losing a loved one, especially someone with public recognition, Our instinct is often to reach out directly, to send that message, to make that call, to show up at that door. But Sherkita's experience reminds us that sometimes the most supportive thing we can do is respect distance. The people who helped me most, she shared, were the ones who said, I'm here when you're ready, and then actually waited until I was ready. True support isn't about inserting yourself into someone's grief. It's about creating conditions where they can grieve authentically, without performance, without pressure, without an audience. This brings me to perhaps the most important lesson from Sharkita's journey. Grief isn't linear and it isn't universal. There's no right way to process loss. There's no timeline for healing. There's no roadmap for rebuilding a life after its foundation has been shaken. Some days I celebrate his legacy, Sharkita told me. Other days I can barely hear his music without breaking down. Both are valid. Both are part of loving someone who shared their gift with the world. That complexity, that permission to experience grief in all its contradictions, is something we rarely allow public figures. We expect consistency, we expect strength, we expect inspiration, we expect them to either completely fall apart or miraculously rise above. But real grief lives in the messy middle, in the both and. In the days of strength and the nights of collapse, in the public smile and the private tears. And perhaps that's the gift of Sharkita's vulnerability in sharing her story. She reminds us that behind every headline, every tribute post, every memorial playlist, there are real people navigating real pain, people who deserve space, people who deserve privacy, people who deserve to grieve on their own terms. So I want to challenge each of us today. When news breaks about someone's passing, whether a global celebrity or a community figure, let's revolutionize how we respond. Let's disrupt the culture of entitlement that treats grief as a spectator sport. Instead of reaching for your phone to post that immediate tribute, pause, ask yourself, would this person's family want this shared right now? Am I honoring their privacy or satisfying my need to be seen grieving? Instead of messaging that friend who just lost someone with, let me know if you need anything, try thoughts. I've scheduled a meal delivery for Thursday. If that doesn't work, text no and I'll reschedule. No response needed. Instead of asking for details about someone's loss, simply say, I'm holding space for you. No need to explain or share more than you want to. These small shifts create ripples of change. They transform how we collectively hold space for grief. They honor the profound truth that Sherkita Long-Platt has taught us, that mourning in the public eye requires both a community willing to step back and a culture willing to protect rather than probe. The next time you encounter someone navigating loss in the spotlight, remember Sherkita's words. The greatest gift anyone gave me was permission to grieve privately despite loving someone publicly. That permission, that sacred protection of someone's innermost pain, is something we can all extend. Not because it makes for a good social media post, not because it positions us as especially compassionate, but because it's the profound human respect that each of us would want when facing our own darkest days. When the music stops, when the spotlight dims, when the world moves on to the next headline, that's when real grief begins. And that's precisely when those left behind need us most. Not as audiences, but as guardians of the quiet, messy, private space where healing can finally begin.